So first of all, I had a chance to read an advanced copy of the book, and it was a fantastic read, and it's rare that we get to read books that are
That's enough.
Okay. It's rare you get to read a book that kind of describes our daily life and kind of takes a step back into kind of what it is we're doing and the phenomenon that we're a part of. I remember when Chris Anderson came here and gave his talk, he said, it always surprised me I'm so well received at Yahoo because all I'm doing is kind of providing the sideline play-by-play for the plays you're running on the field. And that was very flattering, first of all, but second of all, I think you all, the pundits out there, don't know how valuable it is to hold up a mirror to us and give us a little bit of distance and perspective on what we're doing. And I had the same experience with this book. It was a fantastic read, really well written. The examples were, I learned quite a lot from the book, but also felt like it was a great validation and great resonance with what we're doing here at Yahoo. Also want to commend you because there's not a bias towards any of the other companies in Silicon Valley. In fact, if there's a bias, lots of examples from Flickr, lots of examples from Delicious, and it was great to see an even-handed approach to the phenomenon that we see going around now. So thanks for that. So for those that haven't yet read it, I think we should probably start with a brief kind of 5-minute overview, your elevator pitch of what's the fuss about. Everything is miscellaneous. What does that mean?
I have a little newsletter, a little free newsletter I've been doing for like, I don't know, 10 years or so. By the way, is this thing on?
No.
Okay.
Could be a little louder.
I can hear me, so I just want to see if it's actually on. I thought I just flipped it on.
I think it's on, not loud.
So I have this little newsletter, and it runs a contest every. I'm gonna stand.
Stand, please.
What the? I'll sit down in a minute, but since I'm doing the elevator pitch, you don't sit in an elevator.
No, you don't.
Stand in an elevator. So I run a little meaningless contest in it every issue, and this time it was, can you please tell me what my elevator pitch is? I'm just really bad at this, so thanks a lot. So I'm going to give you two. One is, neither's going to be particularly long elevator ride. So one of them is, let's see. We're really good at organizing physical objects. We've been doing this for as long as we've been around, and there have been physical objects. And we've been developing techniques for like 10,000 years about how to do this. We're really good at it. Even when the objects are massive libraries of complex information, physical information, we're good at it. Or a physical store that's gigantic. We're good at it. We've turned it into a science. But physical objects, when you organize them, there's a basic principle, which is everything has to have a place. And it can't be more than one place at a time. So everything gets one spot. And because of that, that's very limiting. I mean, we've got to do it in the real world, but it's very limiting when applied to ideas. So it also means that given that so many of our ideas are preserved and communicated on paper, we're now dealing with ideas as paper, we end up with regimes of power that those who get to organize the ideas accumulate power instantly. They decide what's worth publishing, or broadcasting if you in a different regime, but what's worth in any one-to-many relationship, right? So what's worth broadcasting, and what's the order and arrangement of the stuff that we'll do? What goes in the newspaper? What goes on the front page? What goes in the store? What gets sold? And where is it organized? So a lot of power that just automatically goes to those people. So when you move online and those limitations no longer apply, when you can organize things as you want, you don't have to fight over how you're going to organize the CDs in your apartment. You can just make as many playlists as you want, and you can do it according to whim and to your interest at the moment and the way you think about things. When you have that sort of freedom, first of all, you need a new set of principles to enable people to manage, because this is wide open. It's way harder. And second, which is what we've been developing. You can read the history of the web, in fact, as the history of us developing together new tools and techniques, but actually new principles for organizing stuff, the digital stuff, and our ideas, therefore. And also, secondly, the power relationship relationships shift instantly. Those who had power because they have control over the filtering, the organizing, now they're competing with everybody else. So that's what the book is about. That's pitch one. Pitch two is the much less popular one. It is, I think my publisher maybe is not happy about my giving you this pitch, but in some sense, the book is an argument against the notion that there is a right way to organize the world, that there is an order to the world, or a right order to the world, which is an idea that goes back way far in our Western culture. In fact, it goes all the way back to the beginnings of our Western culture, and actually further than that, but the convenient sort of peg for this is Aristotle. Aristotle is really clear. You want to see this formulated with a brilliance never surpassed? Then look at Aristotle, because he's got it nailed, and with a brilliance that is breathtaking. He was the philosopher, called the philosopher, up through the Middle Ages. We're talking 1,500, 2,000 years, where our culture, our Western culture, said simply, there are four causes. You want to know how the world works, you will read the philosopher. There's no temptation, no desire to surpass what was already known to be true. So a guy of unequaled intellectual power. So that's where you look if you want to see this case begin and be made and really nailed down. The case is very simple. There is, in order to know is to know a knowable world. Well, the world's if the world's in constant flux, there's nothing to know. So to know the world, one must assume that there is an order to be known. And furthermore, that this order, this arrangement of pieces, everything goes in one spot, because otherwise you're talking about madness. If something can't be two things at once, that's Aristotle's principle, right? It has to be one thing. And what it is where it is in the set of relationships. So you can't have something filed twice, because then it's two things, and that's craziness, and then there's no knowledge possible. First of all, so everything has a place, and second of all, that place is defined by a simple definition, a simple knowable definition. If the definition is knowable, then there's no possibility of knowledge. To know is to know what makes things into things. That means a simple definition that determines whether something goes in a category or does not. And that was our assumption for knowledge for thousands of years. And I say this to you now, and you very likely reject it as implausible. It's not what you believe, but nevertheless, it's not even remnants. This is deep in our culture. It's still there. It's there in the argument over Pluto. People are outraged that, oh my God, how can you even say there might not be 9 planets? They're so confused because of this way of thinking, that between the idea that they act as if you're denying that there are things in those positions, when in fact, the belief that there have to be 9 planets goes right back to an Aristotelian way of thinking, that there is a right way of organizing the world. Which, I'm sorry, going on too long, I'll just say one more thing. The International Astronomical Union this past summer, they fell right into the Aristotelian trap. And they said, let's come up, okay, we got to preserve those planets. So let's come up with definitions that will do that. And so they came up with 2 definitions, basically, that it has to be large enough to be a planet, you have to be large enough to round yourself by the action of natural action of large masses. Because we want to say that planets are big, but any other definition would be arbitrary. If we say, well, as big as Mercury, then, well, why? But you say it's big enough to round itself, now you got physics involved. And the second part of the definition is that it's got to clear its space. Okay, so why those 2 criteria? Those are uninteresting criteria. Why those 2? Because then at least we get 8 out of 9 planets back. It's the only thing recommending it. It's not science. And the far better way of understanding this would have been to take the step in public, for the astronomers to take the step in public and say, look, the solar system's really interesting. There are billions of things that have lots of properties, and we want to understand them. And some of those properties are very interesting. For example, objects that have atmospheres. Oh, that's interesting. There's something more you can ask about those things. Objects that have water. Oh, there might be life there. That's a really interesting property. Well, there are 4 objects that have atmospheres. One of them is a moon. It's Titan, a moon of Saturn. But we don't have a category for that. We instead have 9 frickin' planets because they're big and round, and that's what we've been taught. It's not even an interesting category. Far better would have been to say, look, big miscellaneous solar system, endlessly interesting, lots of attributes. Which ones we take as categories depends upon what we're interested in. You're interested in extraterrestrial life, then look for water. That's your category. You're interested in mining on foreign, then look for copper deposits. You're interested in things that might smash and hit us, then look for trajectories. Those are interesting categories. It's a mistake to think, it's an Aristotelian mistake to think that there have to be 9 planets. Far better to say it's a miscellaneous, hence the title of the book. It's put them all into miscellaneous, and then start to sort by the attributes that matter to you depending upon what your interests are, what you're looking at. So, in some sense, the book is an argument against the notion that there is a single right way of organizing the world, that there is a real order to the world, as opposed to the orders that cut through the world in interesting ways based upon what we're trying to do and what our interests are. So, that's the 2 elevator pitches. I will now sit down.
Cool. Well, obviously this has a lot of relevance to Yahoo. Yahoo's all over that pitch, not the least of which is, I know the guys who do Yahoo horoscopes, those scientists were completely thrown into a loop about the planet thing. They've been tweaking their algorithms for months based on planets.
But the great thing is, now that we know exactly how many planets there are, those horoscopes have gotten so much more accurate.
I think so. So, anyway, I'm by nature a really messy person. I mean, in my personal life, if you saw my car, my bedroom, those kinds of things, which is much to the dismay of other people in my life, in the orbit of my life. And I felt somewhat vindicated and validated by your book. Was I wrong? And if you've bumped up in your research for this book, you know, people that have helped invent the internet and these phenomena as we know it. You've bumped up against librarians and kind of people that are the last bastions of the old guard and things like that. Do you find that there's any correlation between, you know, are librarians neatniks that think everything has their place and kind of internet folks more like me, or is that a different quirk?
Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea if it separates that way.
Okay. Can I still feel vindicated somehow?
Yes, you are vindicated.
Okay, great. So messy. Good.
There is a fundamental difference between internet mess and physical mess, though.
Well, I agree. I know Raimi Stata, who got us into desktop search, talked about people organizing. There are pilers and there are filers, right? And I think desktop search is the first time you have a tool to recover information without necessarily caring about what folder you put it in, things like that. Do you find today that internet users kind of cleave, and is there a mass shift now that we're starting to develop the tools to do more of an ad hoc organization? Or do you feel that with things like files on a file system, typically there is one instance of the file that doesn't physically live, or in terms of striping on the bits, except with RAID arrays, in a couple places. On my personal hard drive, there's one place it is, even though I can have virtual pointers to it everywhere. Did you do any studies of filers and pilers, or?
No.
No. Okay.
No, I'm not that fact-based.
So
that would be good to know.
This is all from the gut.
But it's an important. I think it's an important area.
So in terms of, I'm a huge slob. I just don't know if that correlates to our librarian slobs at home. I have no idea. I mean, you can imagine going both ways. But
mother-in-law is a librarian, and she's not a slob, so there's another data
there you
point.
go. Okay.
The fundamental internet urge is, in fact, to be messy.
Mhm.
Now, that doesn't mean that internet users are all slobs, either personally or in their internet habits, and I'm sure that we vary greatly in how we do this. I'm sure there are people who go to Delicious with a worked out set, a tag set in mind that they've worked through. These are exactly the tags they want to use, and there are other people who are much more ad hoc, as I am. And we need to accommodate both. But the fundamental urge of the internet, beyond the individual participants, is not to manage the contributions to it, right? As opposed to the old, let's build a big network and we'll sift on the way in. We'll make sure it's a high quality network because we'll keep the bad content out, and we'll make it easy for our users by figuring out ahead of time where we're going to file everything. We'll have nice folders, we'll work it all out for everybody. That's not the instinct that built the internet. The instinct that built the internet is, you want to post it. We'll figure out later how to find it. And we'll invent as many different techniques as we possibly can to help you find it, to help the people who are messy, who are just sort of know and have a hunch about what they want to find, well, good, let's help them. And those who are making precise searches where they need to know exactly this fact, we'll help them too. And most people at different points of the day are actually each of those. We need to help everybody, but the net itself would, of course, not have. So the Library of Congress gets 7,000 books in a day. That's a lot of books. It's nothing on the internet. I mean, I think I post 7,000 times a day, I think. So they have hundreds of people who help classify those 7,000 books. I mean, they come in on pallets and they get shifted from one person to another, and sometimes they fight over, no, this one isn't in my category, it's in yours. And when they have a fight like that, they have weekly meetings where they figure out which category and do they need a new one. And the Library of Congress is brilliant at this. And these are very dedicated, hugely smart people who figure out, well, no, we do need a new category or we don't. And that works for 7,000 books a day. It does not work for a million new. The internet could not have grown if that were the impulse. So one of the lessons in the book, I think, that applies, I meant it on a smaller scale, but it actually applies to the internet overall, is that the old instinct in trying to organize a set of data is you filter on the way in and you categorize on the way in. You have experts doing it, and that's what we've had to do, because you want to protect people from the junk knowledge and help them to navigate. Well, for local projects and also for the internet as a whole, the book argues for a different set of principles, which says no. Include everything. It's now already at the point where it's way more expensive to delete something than it is simply to include it, which you know from your personal hard drive as you're uploading all of those digital photos. It's way harder to get rid of them, because you have to look at all of them and make the decision. I just took 5 pictures of Aunt Sadie on the beach. Which of the 5 do I like? It's easier just to keep them. So it's more expensive to delete than to include. So include everything. Furthermore, if you're building a library and you want to exclude the article about Paris Hilton because it's trash and trivia, which it is, nevertheless, in 2 years or 5 years or 50 years, it's absolutely guaranteed to be a graduate student who's doing research on the media's understanding of the trivial, of Paris Hilton, of class distinctions in the media, and will want to have that. You don't know what people are going to want. You don't know what their interests are going to be. So include everything. And rather than categorizing on the way in, categorize on the way out. Let the user do it. Give her the tools, which Yahoo is being remarkably good at. Give users the tools by which they can sort and organize on the way out. You can't anticipate what people's interests are, and we don't have to anymore. So messiness rules.
A good example would be Bill Clinton innocently hugging a member of the audience wearing a beret, not a significant frame of film the first time it flew by, but ultimately, they had to go back, scour the archives, and that became an important film later. So you don't know what's important.
Right. 1961 Sears catalog that has the gun that Lee Harvey Oswald used, right? Which was not tagged at any point. And in the description, in the text of that catalog, the words JFK never showed up. Nevertheless, but tagged afterwards, it would.
Yeah, right. So I have a question. We have evolved as a species. In fact, all species have evolved with this spatial constraint. Things, in the physical universe occupy space. And suddenly we're in this period of transition where things are removed. And we have seen over the course of the internet different paradigms of navigation, virtual stores and things that try to reintroduce a spatial component or even a hierarchy or layout. What do you feel about our brains and the kind of way we're wired to operate in the physical universe, kind of when we remove that constraint? Are there going to be those of us that are too old to adapt, and kind of thinking about generationally, kind of the youth today that have grown up with this concept of the miscellaneous, what's happening to us as a species and us as a society in the wake of this change?
Well, we're all going to be bald and have really big craniums. That's the only thing I'm sure of.
Some of us already are.
So there's 2 parts to this. One is, clearly I'm not a brain scientist, nevertheless, it does seem from what I have read that the brain is connective tissue, actually. It's not hierarchical. It doesn't work primarily in taxonomies and Aristotelian or Dewey Decimal systems with a root and then a bunch of branches. Well, clearly we can think that way. But at its heart, we seem to be clusterers. We notice pattern similarities, and then we cluster and we join in loose affiliations. Joshua Schachter, who you may know, in fact, whose asses you own, not that anybody ever, from Delicious, has said that something can be 73% in a category, thanks to tagging. Well, in a traditional classic taxonomy, it can't be. And if you're Aristotle, it absolutely can't be. You can't be 73% bird. You're a bird, or you're not a bird. Oddly, our old way of thinking is way more binary than the digital world allows us to be. The old world, you have to make decisions about which pile things go into, and that's a binary decision. You lump and you split that lump, and you lump that one some more, and then you end up exactly with a taxonomic trait. That's a limitation on the physical. It's not a limitation on how we think, nor how our brain seems to operate, which is these loose associations and clusters. So it seems to me that what we're doing now on the net, with all of the looseness of the association and the ability to cluster partially and to have things in multiple categories, is actually a better reflection of how even our brains think. In terms of the young versus the old, there's another split that's worth mentioning, by the way, which is those who have power and those who don't. And there's a lot of the politics of this change has to do with that. But there's also, it seems, a fracture along those who are growing into this and those who are the natives versus the immigrants, as a rough, sort of split. And we are seeing this fault line all over. And one of the clearest places, I think it's a real fault line, and one of the clearest places is, not surprisingly, in the schools, where I acknowledge I'm highly biased here, so just forgive me, but we put 3 kids through public schools in Massachusetts, wonderful public schools that have been driven down by the insistence on testing and measuring, and plus the following, in my view. So our kids are doing their homework, they're doing it online, they're using a computer, because of course, they don't know how to handwrite, so of course they have to use a computer. And the computer is, of course, online, because we're a relatively affluent community, so of course we're online. So they're doing and they have their IM sessions open. Of course they do. And so, of course, they're talking about boys and girls in sports, and they're talking about, what did you get on question number 3? And I don't understand the question, I don't understand the answer, I don't see why she says that economics had something to do with the Civil War. What's economics? Or whatever. And they're doing their homework together, of course they are. And then but they're getting graded individually, and they're getting tested more and more and more, and it's all, if they separate the tables, they all face forward, they get their little books, and they write down what they know as individuals. This is a radically different view of knowledge. What they're being told is to know is to be, I mean, this is an old rant, right? But it's getting worse. That they're being told that to know is to have content shoved into your head and be able to write down answers. Whereas they're doing the right thing online, outside of the view of teachers who think they're doing their homework by themselves. They're not. They're learning socially, which is, of course, I think, what we want. I don't want my kids to think that to be educated and to learn is to be able to shut yourself up in a closet and face in the corner and do things by yourself. That's how Descartes ended up with his psychotic vision of what it is to be human. The schizophrenic view of what, we don't want that. We want them learning together because that's what they're going to be doing for the rest of their lives. And they're never going to be writing reports, by the way. This totally artificial construct that is the focus of a lot of their learning life. And if they are writing reports, they're not going to be doing it by themselves, and they're not going to be doing it on one way or another. They're not going to be doing it in physical libraries. They're going to be doing all of their research online, even though in school, when they're writing their damn reports, they're told no more than 2 internet sources. There is a real fracture there, and it's resulting in a generation of students who are completely cynical and deserve to be cynical about the education system.
How would you test in this social learning? I mean, I think that it's just convenience, right? You feed a bunch of multiple choice answers and you get a score. The difficulty is trying to test.
Yeah, and I'd want to know why we're testing, is the first thing. So a part of the, in Massachusetts, it's the MCAS, that's the test that we're giving. And I hate the MCAS. It's 3 weeks of testing.
Did you pass?
No. Before my time. I mean, after my time. Yeah, well after my time.
It's how
But
the state divides up their budget, right?
Well, this is a consequence of the No Child Left Behind, where funding depends upon this. And so, I'm from a well, actually, I'm from Brookline, which is a wildly affluent. I'm in the part that isn't quite as affluent, but overall, Brookline is, an affluent community. Brookline, generally, we don't like the MCAS, but if you look at polls and what people are saying statewide, the poorer the community, the more they like the MCAS, because it is actually highlighting the need to deliver some resources to these schools. So my point of view is economically biased, and therefore almost inevitably racially biased, because that's how the country works. That those fault lines seem to track each other depressingly closely. So I want to acknowledge that. However, what's happened with the MCAS has turned from a way of evaluating how well schools are teaching, where I acknowledge it has some value, into evaluating whether students can get high school degrees, which it now is. There's, I think, an almost inevitable tendency to move in that direction. So testing schools to make sure that schools are doing the right job so we can fix that, sure. How do you do it? I don't know. I don't think it's too hard to figure out ways to do it. Testing students, I'm much less interested in. I think the ways that you do it are much harder. I would much rather, in many instances, not all, I think a useful technique that's hardly being used would be to say to students, look, we're studying the Civil War, the causes of the Civil War. Your job as a class is to create the wiki about the Civil War. I want you to cover together all the topics that you think are interesting. So you're going to do economics and slavery, you're going to do, et cetera. Do it. Go out and do it and fix it. When somebody writes something that's not right, fix it. And I, the teacher, I'm going to be there helping you, absolutely. I'm going to tell you, by the way, that you got this from a source that you better look at again because it's full of crap. And here's how you can tell. That, and maybe look at how students are participating in that. I'm really not so interested. Testing as a means, it's become the end. You should not press that button on me. Sorry, I'm not responsible.
So let's map that to organizations. You had a good part of the book devoted to org charts and the structure of the organization. Most of us work at a reasonably big company. Yahoo's now about 13,000 people. And we have a hierarchy. We have a CEO, and he has reports, and we all live 9 levels down from that. Can you comment on how is this new world order changing the corporation, or will it change the corporation? And you talked about the separation of those that have the power from those that don't. Is this going to percolate through education into the corporate world as well, or is that happening already?
I think it's already been happening for years. There is resistance of many types, all predictable. Some of the resistance is venal, and we just want the people to get old enough to die. It's not going to change. Some of it is realistic, practical, and how do we manage, how do we test, applied to, how do we evaluate and pay. And those are real concerns. But I think everybody, especially in this part of the world, knows that, well recognizes that the social networks are, really important, where most of the real work and value in the organization occurs. That's where it accumulates. And B, those don't necessarily reflect the org chart. The org chart sometimes is wildly out of whack, in which case you get cynicism and people leave because but it's almost always somewhat out of whack. It's not a map of, it's a map of a different thing. But you see it all around. Email, I mean, if nothing else, email and mailing lists, which are very old world sorts of technologies, just by themselves have sort of democratizing effect in which the position of the piece, so to speak, of the person in the org chart matters much less than what sorts of contributions she's making to the group knowledge. Mailing lists are an amazing artifact. I mean, much of what people are saying about Wikipedia and its value, which I agree with, I'm a very big fan, but you could say and spend, I wrote the book writing about Wikipedia. When I actually wrote the book, it was a little more novel than when people are reading the book, so I'm a little sorry there's so much about Wikipedia, much as I love Wikipedia. Anyway, mailing lists are, much of the values of Wikipedia are already in mailing lists, where you have these multi-year engagements by people who you may not know on a mailing list, where I don't exactly know who the people are. Even if they sign their name, it doesn't mean much to me. I don't know who they are. But who establish themselves as incredible experts on relatively focused areas over the course of 10 years. And not only are they giving us their expertise, something new just happened, here's why I think it's important, but they're in conversation. And so with others who dispute, agree, add to, and so the mailing list itself is really the unit of knowledge. It's that conversation. Just as at Wikipedia, it's the conversation, it's the discussion page, it's the real unit of knowledge. The knowledge is not in anybody's head, it's literally in the discussion, in the mailing list. It's very hard to then break that down into an org chart and say, well, the value is here, here, and the position here. It's not. It's in the social interaction. It's in the conversation. And especially, with this part of the world, everybody knows that. Everybody's really comfortable with that. At what point will organizations feel a need to more formally recognize that? I don't know. The organizations, especially businesses, really want to survive and do well, and so they will figure it out in very practical ways.
Do you think capitalism takes care of it, adapt or die kind of thing? Like, we will have to figure that out or else people will be leaving? Is that the...
Yes, it's not always the fastest and fairest way to get to those goals. But this is why business, I think, reflects many of these trends and issues faster and better than education and politics, both of which are relatively free from those pressures.
Yeah. Back to 6 pictures of Aunt Edna. I heard somebody once say that it's getting to the point where storage is now so cheap and camera phones so prevalent that you can literally record every moment of your life. And there's this guy, Justin TV now, who's wearing his camera 24/7. And the comment was that,
I love his channel.
Do you? No. The problem is that you don't get a second life with which to review the first one. So how do you deal with, in a world where you can save everything, every moment of your life can be digitally recorded for later review, is that a blessing or a curse?
There's a Robin Williams movie had that thing.
Yeah.
I don't remember the name of the movie.
There's also the Gordon Bell project.
Yeah.
My Life Bits.
Yeah.
That,
Microsoft.
Which it strikes. So maybe I'm being old-fashioned, but it strikes me as sort of nuts, for the reason that you say. So I don't know. So we record everything, and then we hope somebody else comes across what's interesting, and you
Well, another thing, it gets to metadata. One thing they're doing at MIT, the Effective Computing Group, is they're measuring your heart rate, galvanic skin response, and things like that, so they can find the important moments of your day when you almost rear-ended that guy because you were on your BlackBerry and your heart started going. You can relive that moment because it was important to you, or the moment your boss was yelling at you, or whatever it is.
I don't think the moments when my heart races actually tracks the moments that are interesting. In fact, I was on a treadmill this morning. Isn't that a metaphor of uninteresting?
I've never been on one. I wouldn't know. But so do you think there is a point at which enough with the data collection already? God forbid we should all have a personal, camera and holster that kind of records every moment of our life, or is that really?
That's why we have governments. Let them record every moment of our life.
They're already doing that, I'm sure. I want to say hello to our friends at the CIA. I see a hand up in the crowd. I want to encourage everybody to get your questions ready, and we'll spend the rest of the time letting you guys dialogue with Dave. But back there?
Just to be devil's advocate about the why record every moment of the day kind of thing, because the argument against it is like the argument against Twitter, like who cares about what you just had for lunch or something like that. And doesn't it succumb to the Paris Hilton argument from earlier that it might be interesting to somebody somewhere someday, and I'm not trying to make a case for everybody recording every single thing, but I totally agree also that we don't have enough hours in the day to live the hours we just spent up to that second. That's obviously insane, but there seems to be some interesting potential about everybody broadcasting lots of stuff. Based on the idea of put it out there and let other people tag it and sort through it.
So the living example that we have of this is London, where everything is recorded. It's all over everything, every public space. Apparently, you're live on TV. It's done for security purposes. People don't seem to be objecting to it too much. They're not saying, turn off the camera, I want to pick my nose. They seem to be okay with it. And the use that's made of it is that they captured the subway bombers. So it would be very hard, I think, to make the public argument in London against this. I'm sure there are people who are making it. I'm a civil libertarian. I have, at best, deeply mixed feelings about it, nevertheless. So there is an argument, certainly, for recording everything. The argument against us doing it is, and the Twitter example is a good one. Twitter, I do Twitter. I find Twitter really interesting and actually occasionally moving. Is that Twitter and, it's the same argument you heard against blogs, that who wants to read about somebody in his pajamas writing in his parents' basement, writing about his cats. In those cases, as opposed to the head-mounted camera, it's mediated by human meaning. There's somebody who, A, thinks it's important enough to write down, an act that interrupts some other activity, and it is written by a human in human language, and thus is an expression of human meaning. There's an intense amount of filtering that implies. It's very far.
But that's filtering on the way in.
Well, into what? So, yes, it's creating, so we're doing two things simultaneously, and it's dialectic, or it's inhalation and exhalation, which is we are creating this vast infrastructure of meaning, of meaning. Now, wearing the head-mounted camera is an edge case of meaning. I don't know if it is or not. I want to stick for the moment with the clear cases, which are people writing things down about what matters to them, and matters to them to various degrees. I mean,
I think you have a great example of this in your book. You actually say, I think recording every moment of your life would be like Stephen Wright's joke of, I'm building a map that's at 1-to-1 scale. Kind of, It carries no meaning because there's no reduction or filtering whatsoever. Now, it may be that you could do that. I guess you're at least collapsing three-dimensional reality into digital bits. So I'm actually a fan. I think we eventually will record every moment of our life, not just from one camera, but we'll have 360-degree views, and you can filter it later. And 99.99s of that will be absolutely useless and never of interest to anyone, and that won't matter at all because you can filter it on the way out. And the advantage is going back to grab that moment that was. And if it's cheap and free and easy to do that, why wouldn't we?
And assuming that we have the retrieval techniques that put the semantics in
After the fact.
Yeah.
I just a counterpoint to that. I was reading somebody saying that you take all these pictures of your daughter growing up and things like that. You're taking away their ability to reinvent themselves when they get older and become a teenager.
Make the same argument about Facebook. Make the same argument about MySpace and Facebook, which many adolescents, as they are now entering the job force, are finding that this is another one of these clash points where we haven't yet learned to forgive in public. We always we have very precise rules about, or norms actually, for what we are allowed to pay attention to in public. If you overhear somebody on a cell phone walking down the street, almost never can you interrupt and say, "How dare you!" There are, however, occasions when you can, and we probably would agree roughly on when those occasions are, even though we have not made these norms explicit. Well, we don't have good norms yet for what you can ignore from what a kid who is 16 wrote in MySpace when they're trying to hire her for a job. And so you have this clash where on the other side of the fault line, the employer says, "Well, I see that you were drunk many weekends when you were in high school, and we will not tolerate that sort of." Well, we've got to learn that this is not something we're allowed to pay attention to. We have to have some norm, but it's going to be very difficult to get to that position.
Social amnesia.
Or you have
Which we always have. It's nothing new. We can't exist without this day-to-day level of forgiveness and ignorance, because otherwise we're all over each other all the time.
Right. Ben?
I know I haven't gotten through the book entirely, so I apologize if it's well covered, but the next...
I covered that in chapter 6.
Yeah. That's a good stock answer. The tools for retrieving these things in meaningful ways, the next generation of them, the best bets for those where you see the most fruitful investigation.
Well, so it's a mug's game to answer this question, but I will anyway.
Thank you.
For the near term, there's continuing machine processing, natural language processing, machine processing, semantics, all that sort of stuff, and you never know when there's going to be a breakthrough, but it's, I'm still waiting. It seems to me the most promising stuff that's happening now has to do with social filtering, using other people, who hopefully you can designate as well as find, people you know, people you admire and respect, using them as the way to make sense of the mass and find what's happening. And in a way that is simply organizing what's been going on for years and years anyway. So you know the Daily Me fear, Nicholas Negroponte? Yeah. A brilliant piece in like 1992 or so, very, very early. Oh my God, he's a smart guy. The fear that we will each have individualized newspapers and thus lose the common bond. One of the best responses to this, by the way, is Yochai Benkler in his amazing book, The Wealth of Networks. Not an easy book, but oh my God, is that a good book. So one of the responses to this is, I think, well, we've had something like the Daily Me since 1992. When we get the printed newspaper, I get the Boston Globe every day, which I really like, but I don't read for the news because it is literally yesterday's news. I'm getting that online, of course. And the front page of the Daily Me turns out to be, a lot of it's email, a lot of it's mailing lists. It's people saying, you got to see this article, it's great, it's full of crap, I love it, I hate it, here's what I think about it. It's sites like Dig or whatever, it's blogs for sure that say, I just read this, here's what I think. That's the new front page. So and that's social filtering. I mean, that's why I'm on mailing lists, that's why I go to blogs, because they're pointing out the stuff. So we're already doing this, but we need continually, the story is we need to go up another meta level to aggregate the aggregation of the aggregation and make sense of that, and filter it more and more through the people who we know and respect. We're not very good at that yet, but we will be, I think.
So you see the sort of, sorry, just one quick follow. So you see the most fruitful area of investigation is sort of the social relationships and authority, as opposed to, say, the natural language processing or...
Yeah, but it's a mug's game to say that. So,
Okay.
Because tomorrow, somebody, maybe you, is going to come out with a natural language processing system that actually works and understands what I'm interested in and can find it from all over. And then...
Ask Bradley.
Well, I have a question. This actually happened to me this morning. You just said the key phrase, news that I'm interested in. And this morning I was listening to NPR driving in, and like an echo, the headline came on, 21 civilians killed this morning in Iraq, blah, blah, blah. And I reached for the radio and I turned it off. And I just paused in that moment. I caught myself turning it off. I couldn't bear to hear it again. I lost interest in that story, and I kind of paused and reflected on that I had either become numb or couldn't bear to hear it, whatever. I didn't want to hear that news. It no longer interested me. And so the power of serendipity, or how do we get the important stuff that people aren't interested in but they need to know in front of them? Is there a role for that kind of information?
Yeah, I'm such a... It is a great question, a great example, because you turn that off not because you're not interested in it. You turn it off for some reason that we could spend a long time trying to flesh out the nature of your deep interest in it. Right? This is very different than turning off the Paris Hilton thing, or turning off a movie review of some movie you just really don't care about. It is the fundamental issue of consciousness, is in fact how we care about things. So I'm stealing totally from the philosopher Martin Heidegger, whose big achievement, the thing that made him famous, justly famous, was the recognition that we've been spending a long time worried about philosophers have, and we as a culture, what consciousness is, and in this world about artificial intelligence and NLP and stuff like that, with the assumption traditionally that consciousness is based on reason and is rational, or is based on perception. We build up out of that these moments of perception that we never catch ourselves at, but we're sure must be there because we have a theory that says it's there. And Heidegger says, no, the fundamental idea of consciousness is not even awareness, it's not reason, it's that we care. We care in part because we know we're going to die, so as animals we know we have to care about what's going on in our world. We've got to get away from the car that's about to hit us. But we also care about others because we're profoundly social. So caring is at the heart of, and it's the mystery at the heart of our being, the fact that we care about things. So the notion that we have a set of interests, and we filter by those interests, seems to him and seems to me, I mean, I put myself in the same league as 20th century's greatest philosopher, simply by agreeing, is that would be way easy. If we had a list of interests, and if you fill out a profile form and it says, what are you interested in, I get up to like 3 or 4 interests, and then I've got nothing. I'm in politics, I'm interested in, that's about it. My family, who cares about that? You know, we can't list our interests because interest doesn't work that way. Interest is in fact a way that the world calls to us. It's a way that it catches us. Because you know, right, the serendipity thing is we don't know what we're interested in. I read an article, I think this may actually be in the book, I can't remember. There was some article about a guy in India who's selling a street-side vendor at a traffic intersection, an on-ramp. It was in the New Yorker, it was brilliantly written, and it was fascinating. If you had asked me, am I interested in the lives of vendors in India on traffic ramps, I probably would have said no, because we don't work that way. The world catches our interest, and that's essentially unpredictable and unknowable, and you can't categorize it except you get, somebody asks and you list 4 things you're interested in.
That is in the book, and it really resonated with me. I love documentaries. Like, I can watch a documentary on like how needles are made. Actually, there's something called How Things Are Made. I just love that shit. Like,
it is such a dorky show, but I really like it.
It's so matter of fact, absolutely dry. But yeah, but I didn't know I was interested in that. But I know
exactly.
I'm interested in the general category of how things are made, how the world happens. So almost any documentary, I'm interested in documentaries. If it made it through the filter that somebody actually took the time to create a narrative around it and tell the story, good enough for me, All
right, so there are some areas we can predict that we're interested in, but largely not. The world is way more interesting than our interests, which is why social filtering, I think, is so important, because one of the great guides to what we're interested in is somebody else who we enjoy being with is interested in it. We shared interests are obviously, so I find it hard to believe that anything can replace social filtering for identifying the stuff that actually is going to be interesting to us, including the serendipitous.
So in some ways we do this already. These are just more effective means of doing it. And we do
it locally in every conversation. That's exactly what we do.
So you're a believer that we're not at risk of creating an echo chamber and,
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I think
the world, is too big to stop it. Nobody's going to retreat into a bubble of.
I find it hilarious when mainstream media folks say the internet is a bubble and it's an echo chamber of people who agree with each other talking with one another. Because that's what the mainstream media is. It's a tiny slice of it. It's big. And we're out. So conversation is always done on the ground of agreement, and that's what small talk does. We try to find something if we can't find anything, we talk about sports or movies. But you find something you can agree about, and then we iterate on difference. And that's what we do in blogs, and that's what we do in talking. So there's always an echo. If you want to call that an echo chamber, because it's 2 people who fundamentally agree, fine, but that's a condition for conversation. And the internet, with all of its diversity and the stuff that comes at you that you can't even look at, you hate it so much, to call that an echo chamber is hilarious. The secret that the mainstream media have kept from us in the broadcast era where it's a one-to-many relationship, the secret that they've kept from us is that the world is way more interesting than they ever let on.
Yes?
One of the things you're touching on, and I'm actually interested in your opinion about this, and honestly, even the thing that you were just talking about now is an interesting segue for it, is the fact that generally whenever you have any of these societies, you almost always have effectively information bullies. They're the people who have an agenda, who try to push it forward, and like bullies, you have a whole bunch of people who become, sycophants to that information point and basically keep driving this forward. Wikipedia suffers from this occasionally, where they get people who, for whatever reason, try to promote whatever their point of view is and do things and try to get it up and have sections of it effectively shut down from discussion. Your point about having children put together a webpage about the Civil War, it's a great idea, but occasionally they may get things wrong. And unless the teacher can have some sort of force on this and teach the principles of good research, the people aren't going to do that. But the problem is good research is very hard. not a lot of people are interested in really doing it. How do you see a lot of this sort of information and effectively this kind of mob rule type of idea playing out in the future?
Well, I think one of the ways to think about the internet in general, because one points to, you get into these arguments with somebody, and somebody says, which you're not, but some people say, oh, the internet is just a bunch of rowdies, and it's people beating each other up, and they're calling each other names, and they point to a site or two, and you want to say, how many sites are there? You pick those two? There's more of everything on the internet. There's more rowdiness, there's more bullying, there's more racism, there's more pornography, and there's more enlightened discussion, there's more humor, there's more love, there's more of everything. And one of the good things about it is, a guy pointed this out to me a couple summers ago. I was talking with him. He's an Italian graduate student. And he said, you're in a bar, which I'm not, but we'll say, you're in a bar and you're having a conversation with somebody, and it gets a little ugly, and especially if it's two guys and they're and neither one will back down, and there's nowhere to go until one of them, you either have a real fight or you just leave and you're both calling each other, and I can't believe what a jerk that guy was, jeez. And you try to save some dignity because you're in this closed space and you really feel that you can't get out of it, you get stuck in this argument. Well, the internet's really big. And so there isn't the same need to come to resolution. So if it's, let's say, an email dispute with somebody, or a mailing list, it goes back and forth until finally it just sort of, ends, and you end up, unless you have people who like that sort of discourse in that spot. And we need places for people to do that. But in general, you can leave. If this is a spot that's being dominated by bullies and they're just being so awful, you try to reform them for a while, and sometimes, occasionally, it might work. Sometimes they get kicked out, or sometimes you just find someplace else to talk. And as far as the kids go, for a wiki, absolutely, the teacher needs. Right now, the teachers are abdicating. Generalizing way too much. But teachers who say no more than 2 internet resources, from my point of view, they're abdicating their responsibility to be engaged, to help students figure out exactly what they need to know, which is, no, don't believe this site, and here's why. That's knowledge, that's a skill they're going to need, for sure. So I want teachers involved in the wiki, very much so.
How about in the back there? Either one. In the very back.
I was going to say that a lot of the stuff, the concepts you've been talking about have a heavily social aspect to them that, results in everything being miscellaneous. And it seems that without, at least some sort of Aristotelian concrete classification, then isn't there a risk that the truly unique will be pushed into obscurity by the tyranny of the masses, and that it's just going to get pushed down?
Well, so that is a real danger, but it's also a requirement of the Aristotelian system, which only allows some people to decide what's interesting and important. So you get that guarantee as a consequence of that sort of arrangement. It is a consequence absolutely to watch out for in the world in which things have been made miscellaneous by being made addressable outside of their normal structures. So I will can I give you a Google example, please?
Sure.
So do you know about I just heard about this yesterday. It's the new meme. It's not a meme, it's type, quote, "she invented" into Google.
Oh, yeah.
It says, "Did you mean he invented?" And you, of course, understand why that happens, right? It's not really Google's sexism. And likewise, at Amazon, for a while, when you typed in abortion, it would come back and say, "Did you mean adoption?" For exactly the same social reasons. It just turns out that lots of people who... So there is a danger with folksonomies, which I'm beginning to hear to worry me more and more. Because the meme of folksonomy is, I'm afraid, by some being taken up as a simple alternative to top-down taxonomies. So you have a taxonomy, sort of one of these Aristotelian things, but a typical taxonomy being made by experts, and let's say it's very, very good. Nevertheless, it's probably in many ways not going to be as good as the one that comes bottom up from the users. And so here's the thing that I'm worried about. You take the bottom up taxonomy, take the folksonomy, and you replace the taxonomy, and you say now we have a people's taxonomy. Well, that's marginally better than the taxonomy that was there, maybe, but it's missing the point. The point is you don't want one folksonomy. You don't want to simply replace the rigid structure that's been designed by experts with a rigid structure that was designed by the masses, because then you get exactly the problem that you're pointing to. You're getting one way of thinking about the world. In this case, it represents a majority or plurality, but that's not good enough. What we want is the point of having everything being made miscellaneous. It's not a choice that we're doing. It's been made miscellaneous. We can address it any way we want. This huge mass of stuff. What we want to preserve there, I think, is the ability to slice through and gather and cluster in ways that are relevant to our current needs, interests, and cares. Right? That's what matters, and those things are different for each person and different at each instance. So simply replacing one rigidity with another would be a missed opportunity of the first order.
So with that, I want to stop for now. I hope you can hang around for a few minutes and take more questions informally, but let's thank Dave for visiting Yahoo.